Hi everybody, I'm Jerry Spanakis. I'm an assistant professor in Maastricht University. Also helped a bit with the organization of this workshop. We're running a bit late on the schedule, so we'll take a bit more time for the next keynote. As far as I know, also Arvind needs to leave early, so we'll try to keep the time intact. But for now, it is my extreme honor and pleasure to introduce our last keynote. So Arvind Narayanan, he's a professor of computer science at Princeton University and the director of the Center for Information Technology Policy. I assume for everybody in this call, you don't need proper introduction, but I think, the latest book you co-authored, Arvind co-authored, is the AI Snake Oil, which has been read by more than 50,000 stakeholders in the AI, and also before has written books on the fairness in machine learning. I'm personally a big fan of the Dark Patterns project, and that's how I got to know this work. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Arvind. I think you have around 15 minutes and then maybe short time for Q&A, and then we'll be able to finish on time. So without further ado, the floor is yours. I think everybody is looking forward.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I hope people can see my slides. So I would love to talk about the medium to long-term future of AI and how we can prepare for that, how we can steer it, how we can adapt to it. Now, really, everyone has opinions about what the future of AI is going to look like, but of course, no one can predict the future. So why should we listen to anyone on this topic? I think when we dig into the details of why people differ so much about about what the future of AI is going to look like, it turns out that those differences in predictions are often rooted in disagreements about how they interpret the present state of AI. So I think that's a key thing. I think that for someone to have credibility in offering suggestions for the future, they should be able to summarize the present state of AI in a way that makes sense to you, is credible to you. Otherwise, what it means is that they're operating from a set of assumptions that are very different from yours and therefore are going to come up with recommendations that might not make sense to you. So that's what I want to start by doing. I want to start by pointing out a paradox, the level of divergence in terms of how people currently interpret the state of AI. And I wanted to try to tell you how I think we can reconcile that. And if that sounds convincing to you, I think that'll be a good baseline on which to build how we can think about the future of AI progress and what that'll mean for the impacts of AI. And so here's the paradox. When we look at people in tech, an increasing fraction of them believe that human-like AI, some people call it artificial general intelligence, it doesn't matter, there are various terms that mean roughly the same thing, is either already here or imminent. We're talking, a time frame of months. And this is a very sincerely held belief. Of course, some of them have interests in hyping up their products, but uh, the majority of people do seem to hold this belief sincerely. And yet, at the same time, I want to claim that outside of various AI bubbles, AI use seems to be approximately zero. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a second. It might seem surprising. I will show you evidence of this on the next slide. Generative AI use. And the way I interpret this is that everyday people are saying through their non-use of AI that, look, we hear all the hype, we've looked at this, but it's not that useful to us, so we're not using it. And so, who's right? I think not both of these perspectives can be right at the same time. Um, and I want to argue that we can reconcile these two. There is a kind of middle ground, and then I'll go from there. Okay, so first, let me give you evidence of this. There was a paper that said that generative AI is being rapidly adopted, and this is the screenshot of the first page. And it said about 40% of US adults are already using generative AI. This was a few months ago. However, if you dig into the details, it turns out that this includes even someone who might have used ChatGPT once in the last week to get a limerick or something like that. In terms of how people are productively using it, it's a much smaller amount than you might think from that headline. It's only 0.5% to somewhere 3.5% of work hours. Right, and the paper argues that generative AI adoption has been much more rapid than the adoption of the PC back when it was introduced in 1977. However, again, that's only if you ignore this matter of the intensity of adoption. Based on some extrapolations, I think that if you consider this fact, how little most people are using generative AI, you could argue that generative AI adoption is up to an order of magnitude slower than PC adoption was in the first 2 to 3 years after the release of the PC. So that's what I mean by outside AI bubbles, people are not yet really using this technology. And if you ask people in the tech world, they'll just say, "Oh, this is because, people have no idea what AI capabilities are, and they're just behind the curve." And they'll say that lawyers, for instance, just feel threatened by AI and therefore are not using AI. And you hear these views all the time, and that might seem ridiculous to those of you who are out there in the trenches of legal AI, but this is a very genuinely held view among so many people in the tech industry. So, what is the basis of those views? A lot of these very optimistic assessments of AI capabilities are coming from measuring the benchmark performance of AI models. So, when GPT-4 came out, there was a lot of hype about the fact that it can pass the bar exam. And more recently, you have graphs like this. This was from the International AI Safety Report that was released just a few days ago. And you can see here on various exams, including PhD level exams, recently the progress has been looking basically vertical. And this is true, I have no dispute with this chart, but I want to talk about what this actually means. Right, and so this is it's on the basis of this that many people are concluding that AI is as good as a PhD on almost any subject. However, I think this goes back to a very old fallacy in AI. More than 60 years ago, AI pioneers started focusing on teaching AI to play chess. And that was for two reasons. They thought chess is very hard for people, it must be hard for AI. And if AI is good at chess, that would be very easy to measure. Those were the two reasons why they picked chess, and it turned out that AI being good at chess didn't translate to other domains. Unfortunately, I think people who are benchmarking AI are committing the same fallacy now. These exam based benchmarks are very much the same. Because they're so easy to objectively measure performance, they also turn out to be the kinds of skills on which AI is very good, but those skills don't translate to various kinds of real world tasks that we might want AI to perform. So my team here builds better AI evaluation methods. We call it the science of AI agent evaluation. It's the SAGE group. So if you look for that, you'll see a lot of our papers showing the weaknesses of current benchmarks. I don't want to go into those details, but I do think this broad view that human-like AI is here is based on a very flimsy kind of evidence and is broadly wrong. And I do think there is something we can take from the fact that people are not using AI nearly as much as one might think they would. However, I don't think that's the end of the story. I think both sides are missing something here. I do think there are ways in which AI capability in relatively narrow domains has been progressing dramatically, but is not widely recognized by people. So I do think there are two sides to the story. I want to give you just a couple of such examples. There are many of them. And based on my assessment, again, this is not based on any formal evidence I can point to, but just based on talking to people, most people are not at all aware that these are things you can do today. So you can use, for instance, generative AI as a thinking partner. And what I mean by that is, while that PhD level performance on exams might not translate to AI, being able to make scientific discoveries, for instance, right? In the process of my own scientific research, I find it extremely useful to kind of share my thoughts with these AI models, if you will, ask for critical feedback, try to consider different viewpoints on the same question. And so when I'm doing research, I'm using AI every few minutes, and it's been a very significant change in the way I do things. And I do think this idea of a thinking partner is relevant to many different kinds of knowledge work, if you will, perhaps including in the legal area. But this is the kind of thing that's hard to measure with benchmarks, right? Because it's fundamentally about human AI interaction. So you don't have any headlines about this because there are no benchmarks on which AI is crushing this, and so people generally are not aware. It takes at least a few hours of work to figure out how to use it productively in this way. And single-use apps, this is another very interesting one. I'm going to give you a fun application of this, but there are also more productivity oriented applications. When I'm spending time with my kids, I often find it very nice to be able to ask AI to build me an app on the spot in like 30 seconds in order to teach them something. And again, I mean, I've been doing this for over a year now with AI, and it's incredible to me that this is possible at all. Here's a simple example of this. I just asked ChatGPT to build me an app that generates random sentences and generates images to illustrate those sentences and can read the sentence out to the child. And you click a button and you get a different sentence and a different image, and it won't show the image until the child actually reads the sentence. So this is a very nice way to teach my kid phonics and reading. And I build lots of apps for teaching them math and so on and so forth. And it's made a difference to the way we interact, and it's really fun. And it's not the kind of thing you could have imagined doing a couple of years ago. So there are ways in which specific ways in which AI capability is changing dramatically, and people have not explored these tools enough to know that these are things they can do for themselves to make their own lives or their workflows better. So I do think there's a gap in both directions. Awareness of AI limitations is also low. Every week I see these news stories about lawyers who submit briefs filled with hallucinated citations and get into trouble for it. And I predict that this gap might actually increase over time because chatbots, the simple interface is very easy to use, but even there are a lot of pitfalls like hallucinations and bias, which we've been hearing about. However, as these capabilities increase, as you get to these agentic systems, as you get to these reasoning models, the expertise required to get use out of them and avoid these pitfalls keeps increasing over time, and therefore I think this is going to become a big issue. Okay, so that's the big picture. AI capabilities are advancing, but not in the way that technologists are claiming. It's not really, a replacement for people's work in the economy. It is, I think, relevant to the vast majority of knowledge workers. And in many cases, these are capabilities that people are, for the most part, not familiar with. So, what is this going to look like in the future? I do think there is going to be a very long road from capability improvements all the way to how this is going to have an impact on the world and on the economy. Capability, I do think, is going to continue increasing. However, the big question I think that I don't know the answer to is right now we have what is called a jagged frontier. Now, AI capabilities are really strong in some domains, far better than people. Chess playing is a trivial example, but you can think of other ones. But in some cases, AI struggles with things that a toddler can do. Is this going to get smoothed out, or is the jaggedness going to further increase? And depending on this, the implications might be quite different. And something we've written about, and I'll give you citations at the end of this talk, is that translating capability to products is a big step, and companies have kind of dropped the ball on that. So to translate capability to products, they need to work on cost, reliability, and all of these factors, including the user experience that I have listed here. And we give examples in our essays of how that has gone wrong and is slowly changing. But even if they build products that are useful to people, I think for people to actually use those products will require a lot of experimentation to identify use cases and learn to avoid pitfalls, the kinds of things we've been talking about. And the last step, and this is the step that is least often recognized, is that adapting to these new capabilities, new products, new use cases is going to require tons of organizational changes at companies. And it might even require changes to our laws and social norms. To figure out liability, for instance, when AI makes mistakes, sometimes we might say, okay, we should just simply not use AI for that if it's going to hallucinate. Sometimes we might say it's so useful for this application that we want to use it despite hallucinations. And now you have to figure out liability, right? Until laws and norms change to figure out who to blame in certain situations, it's not going to be adopted that much. So here's an example of organizational changes. This is from software. AI is really good at coding, but not at software engineering. Coding is a subset of software engineering. Software engineering requires, all of the organizational things that need to go into maintaining, testing, and developing, let's say, a million-line code base, right? And so if AI has these asymmetric capabilities, does it make sense to reorganize software engineering so that there is a much greater focus on what is called microservices. These are very small, tiny programs that do one thing, do them well, and AI is good at writing these programs, and all those programs talk to each other, as opposed to these kind of monolithic software frameworks that we have now. So far, software engineering has mostly operated on the monolithic framework. But if it were to change to a microservices framework, maybe that would be a much better way to take advantage of AI. But that kind of change, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens over a period of decades, really fundamentally changing the way we do software engineering. So I think these are the reasons why people keep making these over optimistic predictions about dramatic changes coming in like a 2 year time frame, whereas we really should be thinking about decades for these kinds of changes. And by the way, there's a nice literature on this. These are often called the three steps: invention, innovation, and diffusion, that go into the development and adoption of new products in the market. Diffusion here combines these last two buckets. Okay, some last thoughts I wanted to offer you, and then maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions. If this happens, if at some point we have advanced AI that is capable of doing most of the cognitive tasks that we consider valuable in today's economy, what will that world look like? Whenever that happens, maybe never, maybe a couple decades out. I don't think it's going to happen in 2 years. So I think we can take some lessons from this, from past technologies that will apply to this. We can take some lessons from the internet. If you went back 20 or 30 years and told people, look, this new communication medium is one day going to intermediate almost any kind of cognitive work that we do, people would have laughed at you. People did laugh at those predictions. And yet those predictions came true. And the surprising thing is, to me at least, that it didn't radically change the economy. So it is true that today you don't have to go to a library to look up a fact. You can look it up online. This is the sort of thing that a couple decades ago you would have thought is going to give you a 100x improvement in productivity. But what happened was, when you remove certain bottlenecks from your workflows, other things become the bottlenecks. And so it hasn't had a dramatic economic impact, I would say. In fact, there is that famous quotation: the computer revolution shows up everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Right. So, on the one hand, it is true that certain radical predictions came true, but on the other hand, it's true that the skeptics were also right and that this didn't change the world. And so, perhaps we can expect similar with AI. Last thought, we can also take lessons from the Industrial Revolution. That was a time, unlike the internet, when the nature of work did radically change. Before the Industrial Revolution, most labor was manual. And in fact, things that were not manual labor, people wouldn't have considered it work at all. It's crazy. They would have thought that, you can just talk to people and that would be considered work, for instance. And so the Industrial Revolution changed that, right? We were able to automate most manual tasks. And so perhaps AI will do that for most cognitive tasks. But even if that happens, like the Industrial Revolution, it does not in any way mean the end of work. My prediction is that if it comes to pass that AI can automate most cognitive tasks, most of what people will do, most of what we consider work, will be what we now consider to be in the realm of AI control and safety. In other words, even if AI is very capable, we will not feel comfortable putting it out there without any supervision in all kinds of consequential scenarios. And therefore, a lot of what we're going to be doing is operating AI, just like you need people today to operate powerful machinery. And a lot of the decision making that happens today has a normative component, and so a lot of that we won't be comfortable delegating to AI. So the tasks that people will do will focus on those kinds of things. So that's a very brief prediction for how to think about what is the current state of AI, how might this change in the future, on what time frame, and if it does change, what will that world look like. Again, this was very brief, but we've written a lot on this. Here are some references. And if we have time, I'm happy to take 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arvind, for this great talk. I think, yeah, we have some time, short time for some questions. I'll try to synthesize a bit also what was posted on the chat. Maybe my first question has to do with the fact that you mentioned, and maybe correctly, that of course outside our bubble, wherever you are an academic or a developer, the adoption of AI is practically zero. But at the same time, you did mention that we are using it maybe subconsciously on some thinking, partner tasks, and so on. So my question is that, do you maybe think that, of course, the narrative of the big tech that yeah, AGI is coming is, just overhyped, and in the end, that does more harm than good, in the sense that we should focus on perfecting AI, as you said, in the capabilities that it is already working well, right? So as an assistive technology, I'm curious about your thoughts.
Exactly. I do think the hype about AGI is harmful. And to clarify, when I said, some people are using it as a thinking partner, those people I think are in the bubble, so to speak. I'm in the bubble, right? And when I talk to people who haven't spent a lot of time exploring AI capabilities, they're generally not aware that you can use it as a thinking partner. And those are things that we can change, right? So instead of hyping up AGI or replacing everybody, we can teach people how to productively use it as a thinking partner, as an assistive technology to improve their own creativity instead of replacing what they do. And yeah, so the goal of my talk was to focus more attention on those types of things.
Great. And my next question, and then I think we can wrap this up, is also related to something that Santos put on chat, is like also related to your book, right? Your AI snake oil, and related to your previous work on fair machine learning. And in the end, right, with the current direction we see on developing larger and larger models, do you think that maybe if you had to choose, right, shall we focus on the current direction, which is like maybe a dead end, of course, with explaining deep models and deep LLMs? Or do you see also some maybe light in the sense of the regulation and systemic oversight? So what I want to say is that, do you think that technical transparency is still doable, or shall we focus on the regulation? I know it's a tough question, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, why not both, right? So, from the technical perspective, the field of mechanistic interpretability has certainly come a long way. And I think it has helped show that this idea that large language models are black boxes is only because we never bothered to build those interpretability techniques. But we can build those interpretability techniques, right? If we spent 50% of our effort building LLMs and 50% on interpretability, the scenario would look very, very different. But that's never going to be enough. We can't just let companies build those technologies to the extent that they see fit. We certainly need regulation, and the regulation doesn't have to focus on the internals of models, right? What we care about from a regulatory perspective in terms of guardrails has much more to do with the input output behavior of the model, how it's going to behave in various real world contexts. And we can have transparency and guarantees and all those things without ever looking inside the black box of models. So we need that too, but we also need interpretability.
Great. And I think on this positive note, thank you again for this very inspiring talk. I think we're very curious to follow your work also in the future. And thank you for joining us. And I think now I'm gonna pass it back to Ben, who I hope took a breath, and he can do the wrap up of the workshop.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Arvind. It was fascinating discussion, and we have a lot of questions, and I'm sure we'll keep this conversation going. Thank you very much. Wow, what a conversation, what a day, what a workshop. Thank you everyone for joining today. It's been an incredible discussion. I know it might feel like we just scratched the surface of so many topics in responsible AI, but I really hope that it sparked some thoughts on whether we're truly steering AI in the right direction, and what we need to do to ensure we all benefit from this powerful technology, maybe too hype technology, but very powerful. A special shout out to the amazing speakers and panelists for sharing their insights and expertise. This was such a valuable and thought-provoking session. Thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, REAR Labs isn't just about events like this. We're also diving into more research and building tools. You can reach out in any media that you want. We have a website. We can share it here in the chat as well. And of course, a massive thank to my fellow organizers. You saw Kirill and Jerry, but there are more in the background, Royal, Santosh, and Rohit. You guys rock. Thank you so much. This would have happened without you. You might see a feedback form soon. Would love to hear your thoughts so we can make the next event even better. better. Speaking of which, we're already brainstorming of our next event. So if you have ideas of topics or want to collaborate, send them our way. That's it. I hope you found this session is inspiring as I did. And thanks again and have a great rest of your day.